Hello, everybody. Wow, there's not a whole lot of you here yet. It's just turning 6 o'clock, but that's okay. Good for you, the ones that are here. I will say this, though, before I get started. If you're listening to this as a recording or on, some other platform other than live, stick around because we're going to be diving into some pretty deep stuff that I myself did not know. I think you should probably hear about. So you're going to need to follow me through the whole thing to get the benefit. I see more of you showing up. Alrighty then. My name is Stephen D. Kelly, and this is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. We are Truth Cat Radio, the one and only Mr. Kitten. www.truthcatradio.com. Visit us. Anyway, today is 4/25/2024. Yesterday was 4/2/4/24. I don't have a title for this show tonight, but I'm going to take you down a little path. I didn't know what I was going to do today. I thought about it and I put myself out there, and Source always does come through. It's amazing when Source does this, but it's certainly true. Now, last week's show, I didn't really I put it up on TruthCat, but that's it. I wasn't too proud of it. But I think this show is actually very significant. It's going to prove to be very significant. And of course, I present this information to you as something for you to study, not definitive. Because when I do these searches, when I do this research, it's to try to answer questions that I have. And I don't pretend to give you answers, but I want you to see things that I'm seeing that I have not seen, that when they fit together or are looked at a second time, they seem to make a little more sense. So basically, being exposed to the current events, of course, let's see, the war in Ukraine is pretty much lost, at least as far as we're concerned, and we just got through giving them $60 billion. It's amazing. They're just billions and billions of dollars giving them away, giving it away. And of course, Russia is the bad guy. And the other thing, of course, that's going on, taking up a lot of space in the news cycle, is the genocide going on against the Palestinian people by the Israeli government in Israel. And what catches a lot of attention, at least today, is the fact that there's a lot of students in various universities that are protesting, much like students do. There's a history of that, the 60s, Vietnam, that kind of thing. Well, anyway, they found their roots and they're protesting like students do. And of course, the police have come out and it's getting kind of ugly, and we are seeing new levels of fascism taking place. The other thing that really caught my eye this morning that I actually watched for whatever reason, I didn't really kind of sucked me in, but it was a thing put out by, I guess you could call it a right-wing group, about the war against Germany in World War II and what really happened from the perspective of the victim, in this case, the losers of the war. And they showed pretty clearly that there was a orchestrated genocide against the German people. It wasn't just, sure, Hitler did this, Hitler did that, SS did that, etc., etc., etc. But during the war, whole cities were just destroyed, leveled. And after a bombing campaign where the entirety of the Air Force was focused on one city, as soon as the air raids stopped, the people came out of their bomb shelters, they returned with incendiaries. And this happened over and over again. Usually when people were trying to put fires out and perform rescues and triage, that kind of thing, that's when the bombers returned. And they did this repeatedly. More people died in Dresden than all of the people that died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But, and of course, 1.5 million German soldiers died in captivity by the United States. It's amazing. Now, we all know that Russians lost 6 million people in the war. There's all sorts of atrocities and so-called Holocaust. But it really did seem that between Stalin and Churchill and Eisenhower, the rest of them, there really was a systematic desire to commit genocide against the German people for whatever reason. Now, this is all kind of interesting when we look at today what's going on, especially with respect to the rebirth of these Nazis running around Ukraine that the United States has been funding, who are at the same time being controlled by Chabad. Now, it's pretty hard to understand who could make these people do these things. But the Jews seem to be very much involved. So I have to look at this because I think surely there must be more to this. There must be more than just this Semitic thing. Semites. We're told that this is anti-Semitic. People in Congress are railing against these students, saying that they're anti-Semitic. Never before have they seen such high levels of anti-Semitism. So, of course, I'm reminded from my history studies that the Semites primarily were the Phoenicians, or the Canaanites, who became the Phoenicians, in their travels through the Golden or the Fertile Crescent until they settled in the Levant, the area that they call Israel now. Well, actually, it was more like Lebanon, but the point is that I had to look at their culture back. I had to go back and look at it because I thought, maybe there's a possibility that it's not the Jews, it's not the kingdom of David, it's not the descendants of Moses and Solomon, etc. It's something else. It's the influence of this Semite culture, these Phoenician guys, the ones who are doing the child sacrifice and all that. I had to look. Well, the Phoenician Empire, at least as far as Wikipedia is concerned, goes from 2500 BC, that's 2500, to 64 BC. Now, of course, BC, before Christ, the numbers are going down. They're counting down to 0. And then it's after is AD and all that. So I thought, okay, I need to look at this. I need to look at what happened, who did what, and I need to make a timeline of everything that happened between 2500 BC and the time of Christ. One of the things I noticed that was kind of important, but this is basically the Bronze Age. If we go back and look at this, well, a good portion of it's the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age goes up to roughly 800, 750, something like that, when the Iron Age starts. Well, before that happened, there were a lot of very advanced, very cultured, very, well, let's just say rich societies based on the smelting of bronze, which was basically 10 parts copper and 1 part tin, which were, of course, mined in different parts of the populated area around the Mediterranean in Europe and places as far as off, let's say east as Afghanistan, the Orient, India. Gold, of course, was mined. Jewels were mined. And this was the basis of a very cultured, rich society. Lots of trading going on. Now, the Phoenicians, who, of course, were based in Lebanon and used what we would call Lebanon today, they had Lebanese cypress, or cedar. They had cedar, which was very good for making boats. So this is one of the reasons why they had such a successful boat building. Anyway, they sailed and did trade along the entire coast, practically, of the Mediterranean, mostly the southern part, which of course is Africa, all the way up to as far west as Spain, and right up to straight up Gibraltar. They also traveled, Sicily, Sardinia, and other places. They went to Crete, but they didn't really stray into the Egyptian, or not the Egyptian, but the Greek territory. This was a whole other civilization unto itself. But here's the thing that we know. Before going too deep into it, I'm just going to say that we know these guys did child sacrifice. They had a god that they worshipped called Melqart. No Q. Melqart, no U. And this guy basically became Hercules in the Greek and Roman mythology. And he had a female component called Astarte, and she was, what was her name? Aphrodite. She became Aphrodite. But they were their gods. Now I suspect that this Melqart was Moloch. That's the real character here. Makes a lot of sense. Because one of the things that these guys had, these Phoenicians, were these things they called tophets. 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 In Hebrew, the word means seduce. In Aramaic, it means roaster or hearth, burner, like something you'd cook on. Well, in this case, it was for roasting children. There's quite a few mentions of this word in the Bible, a lot of them in Jeremiah. But basically, they called it passing their sons through the fire to Moloch. So this was definitely Moloch. This was a Canaanite thing. Not the same to be confused with what was going on in Babylon, which was going on basically the same thing. But there were subtle differences between the Phoenicians and what was going on in Babylon. Anyway, if we look at the major cities that the Phoenicians made, one, of course, which was Carthage. If you look at the ancient maps, the outline of the city, a major portion or center of the city was dedicated to one of these tophets. So this was a major part of their religion. Now, what else can we say about the Philistines? Not the Philistines, but I'm sorry, the Phoenicians. We know that their empire went up to roughly 64 BC, almost up to the time of Christ. And several things happened to really bring them down, or did they bring them down? Now, one of the things that happened was the people of Israelites showed up. And the Israelites, of course, warred with the Amalekites, etc. And they formed a alliance with these Phoenicians. There was one particular king, Hiram the First. He reigned from 969 to 936. But it was this king of Lebanon that provided all of the materials, all of the trained labor to build the first temple. Now, when I say first temple, I'm talking about the one in Jerusalem. There's a lot of shocking things that I had to learn today, especially around the bloodline associated with the northern kingdom of Israel. Because we like to talk about the sons of Solomon and how it was Solomon that embraced the witchcraft and the black magic and the human sacrifice. Well, the truth is that, yes, he did. Because David and Solomon both looked the other way when the Phoenicians did their child sacrifice. Because it was convenient. Because the Phoenicians had a navy. They had the ability to reach far places of the Mediterranean. And they helped the Israelites spread as far west as Iberia, Spain, the tip of the Atlantic Ocean, the edge of Africa. Well, so again, we have to wonder, who's responsible here? Who's really the bad guy? That's what I'm thinking. You know, in Jeremiah, of course, there's so many places where they describe this going on. Second Kings also describes child sacrifice amongst the Israelites, not just the Phoenicians, but the Israelites themselves. Goes back to that golden calf business. Now, I'll tell you something that's probably going to be a little bit, shall we say, people might argue about, but controversial. And that is, I tried to, when I made this timeline, I really wanted to fit Moses into it, to go back and find documentation of the time of Moses and stick him to a real date, as opposed to the mythology and the stories, the hundreds of days that they spent in the desert, 369 years, apparently, that kind of thing. It turns out that most of that is just a legend. The Moses character may not have existed. I mean, there's been several stories historically about a baby in a basket bound with tar and what have you, cast into the river because it was born to a priestess or something of this nature. It's an old story. So that kind of didn't work. But what did work was the history of the Phoenicians. Of course, they had a pretty strong language, and they were able to record events like their dealings with King David and King Solomon. Well, what can I tell you about that? I'll tell you one thing. In Carthage, the money was called shekels. That should tell you something. Let's look at this timeline a little bit more. So the Bronze Age collapsed in roughly 1200 BC. But before that happened, a lot of other things happened. And I'll tell you, this history is definitely being clouded quite a bit. But there were actually climate change events that caused things like drought, mass starvation. This led to migration, hordes of invaders. But in Greece, or at least in the Aegean, one of the big cultures was the Minoans, who were traders. Not much is known about the Minoans except in their art, in which case you see that they were pretty wild people. They had a great lifestyle, and the women used to run around with their breasts hanging out, and the men would wear these crazy little outfits. Decadent, I suppose you could say, but there was an island that they inhabited that just blew up one day. Let me see. That was in 1600, the Minoan eruption. That kind of wiped out their society. It was gone. And that was right in the middle of the Adriatic Sea, basically, relatively close to Crete. So you could expect that the fallout and the harm done to the, well, let's say the sunlight, the dust, everything, probably had a great deal to do with the inability to produce crops for some time after. This is probably not just one, but one of many events that took place. There were earthquakes also. When did that happen? Probably about the same time as that happened, there was an age of earthquakes that destroyed much of the Levant and other areas. So basically, everything was pretty screwed up. The only ones that were really not struggling and suffering were the people in Babylon and Syria that had access to big rivers, and people in Egypt that had access to the Nile. So the Tigris and Euphrates and the Nile, civilizations that were close to them, they were able to build canals. They did okay. But everyone else, they were turned into rubble. And on top of that, there were invaders. They call them, or the sea people. They call them the sea people. Well, these were people that came on boats from across the Mediterranean, who were mostly refugees. They brought everything with them. And they came from almost every direction. In Greece, everything above Greece or Athens and all that, the Greek civilization was considered wild, and the people came from the north. The same thing happened in the Caucasus. But these guys came, and when they came, they wiped out everything in their path. Cyprus was destroyed by these guys, these hordes of hungry people. There was a great battle when they tried to attack Alexandria or Egypt, and they were turned back. The Pharaoh defeated them. But a huge horde of them landed in the Levant, in the area that we would call now Gaza, and they stayed there. They were powerful enough to be able to continue for some time. These were the Philistines. Near as I can tell, Exodus happened shortly after the Minoan eruption. Now, I suspect that the fall of the Bronze Age, the impending fall of the Bronze Age, the disruption of farming, etc., displacement of huge amounts of people, probably was the exact reason why the so-called Israelites left the land of Goshen, or whatever it was that they were, and did their exodus. To me, they were no more than the sea people, just another band of refugees. So what was it, 400 years later, maybe 300 years after Exodus, the Bronze Age was complete. Huge amounts of countries ceased to exist. The sea people destroyed everything in the entire Levant. They came down and destroyed everything up to Gaza. Well, anyway, so basically what does this mean? This means that the territory was crap. Everything was crap. Civilization at the time was crap. It had fallen. This was a great dark age. The fall of the Bronze Empire was a dark age. The appearance of iron wasn't exactly a good thing for societies that were based on bronze, because it all depended on where the material was mined. Near as I can tell, the northern areas, the areas that we might consider the Caucasus or even Germany, this is where that stuff came from. So what did that mean? That mean that they were able to make plows that cut the ground better. They were able to make swords that killed the enemy better. And this is what they did. This is one of the reasons why so many societies were destroyed at the fall of the Bronze Age. Well, Solomon, like I said, he came around just after 1000 BC. And of course, we know that when Solomon died, Israel split in two. Now, this is kind of important because, this is something they just don't really talk about. They don't talk about any of this. In fact, me personally, I was under the impression that those two people that took over the country after Solomon were both sons of Solomon. No, that's not true. I made a list of the kings of Israel, or Judah. The kingdom of Israel was the northern part. The kingdom of Judah was the southern part. The northern part was much bigger, and the northern part was really where Solomon was based. But the thing is that we're going to focus a little bit on the kingdom of Israel, the northern part. These are not the guys that were conquered by the Babylonians, but the guys that were conquered by the Assyrians. These are also the people that we associate the most with, well, Phoenicia, because Lebanon is right there. It's right next to it. They're neighbors. Doesn't touch the kingdom of Judah at all. And because these are the tribes that were lost after the release from captivity in Assyria and went north into the Caucasus and became the Khazars, those troublemakers. Now, before I go too much into this, I want to just say one thing, is that I've always focused on the Pharisees because of their involvement in the destruction of the temple, the first temple and the second temple, when they let the Babylonians in the gates. This is the kingdom of Judah we're talking about now. When they let the Romans in to destroy the temple. But it turns out that this happened again. It happened in Spain. It happened when, well, I'm going to assume the same Pharisees in Spain threw open the gates and let the Moors in to basically wipe out the Christian monarchy in Spain. Until, of course, Ferdinand and Isabella took the country back and cast out the Jews. So up until that time, I had always thought that the Sephardic types that were, of course, very close to the Chabad were innocent because they were in Spain and never went to Babylon and never went to Assyria. They didn't go through that. So what's the connection here? They did the same business, but what is the connection? Is the connection because it was the Phoenicians that took them there? Now remember, the Phoenicians are the real Semites here, whenever you say anti-Semitic. So it seems to me that it's the integration with the Phoenicians that may be an issue. We definitely know that all of these cities along the coast, which was the sailing trade route of the Phoenicians all the way to the Gibraltar, this was Phoenician territory, and yet it was home to Israelites from way back in the time of David and Solomon. Another thing to remember, of course, is that during the time of David, the time of Solomon, this little area of the Levant right there was one of the largest concentrations of humans on the planet. They had at least 1 million people there. Now that, of course, made them pretty, well, let's just say it protected them from a lot of the enemies that they had, but they were constantly fighting with everybody. Arameans, Ammonites, Moab, whatever, Edomites, various different tribes, Philistines, etc., etc. Point being is that when the kingdom of Israel split with the kingdom of Judah after the death of Solomon, these two countries fought large battles for many years. And unknown to me, I thought it was just the two kings were going to be Jeroboam. What's the names? Let's see, there's Jeroboam. Anyway, it turns out that there's 19 kings of northern Israel, of the kingdom of Israel, the northern part. The kingdom of Judah, I don't know, because their fate is a little bit different, but we're looking at the kingdom of the north right now. So what did I find out? Let's see. First of all, the thing that shocked me the most was that Jeroboam, the guy that was the first king of split Israel, kingdom of Israel, the northern half, he wasn't even a son of Solomon. The other guy was. Why can't I find his name? Oh yeah, Rehoboam. Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the first king of the kingdom of Judah, was actually a grandson of David and a son of Solomon. Jeroboam, what was he? He was a superintendent for Solomon. He was a rebel. He had to flee to Egypt, and he didn't return until after Solomon died, whereupon he became king. And how did he do that? He had to convince all the tribes of Israel to follow him. There was only 2 tribes that didn't follow him, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. They stayed loyal to Rehoboam down there in the kingdom of Judah. So they're the guys that went to Babylon. So let's see what happened, because it wasn't just Jeroboam. Well, I'll tell you something. One thing we know, these 19 kings, they were all evil, each one more evil than the one that came before them. And they all practiced the sins of the Phoenicians, the sins of their fathers. Now, Jeroboam, of course, he was the worst. We know that Solomon did it. We know that Solomon had all these wives from all over the place that were committing heinous acts, worshiping various different, satanic deities, committing human sacrifice. Jeroboam did it. There's scripture, I think it's in Kings or Zechariah, where they basically said that he passed his son through fire unto Moloch. Now, when these guys would fight each other, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, they would both sacrifice babies to Moloch. They both did it. Well, what happened to Jeroboam? Let's see. He died. He had a vision. He had what do they call that? An oracle, someone come and tell him, a prophet tell him that he was going to die. And he basically told him about all the bad things that were going to happen to the kingdom of Israel. I mean, we're talking about Jeremiah type stuff, and it all started with Jeroboam. He was succeeded by a guy named Nadab, who only lasted 2 years. He was killed by a guy named Baasha, who took over. These guys didn't last very long. Baasha was followed by a guy named Elah. Elah was killed by his chariot commander, a guy named Zimri. Now, this guy Zimri, he only lasted 7 days, and then he committed suicide because he was defeated in a battle by a guy named Omri. They say that Omri was more evil than every king that came before him. What is that evil again? The sins of Jeroboam, passing children through the fire. Who came after Omri? Ahab. We all remember Ahab because of his wife Jezebel. When Ahab was killed, Ahaziah came and killed Jezebel, had her eunuchs throw her out the window and trampled her with horses, and then the dogs ate her until there was nothing left but her feet and her hands and her skull. But then he gave that a royal burial because, she was royal. How long did Ahab live? Well, he also died a gruesome death. Not sure if he was shot in the neck or something, but he was replaced by a guy named Ahaziah. This is king number 8 of Israel. Of course, these guys don't live that long, but he also sinned in the way of Jeroboam, as was recorded. He didn't last very long, but he was replaced by a guy named Jehoram, who lasted 12 years. But he was killed by a guy named Jehu, the 10th king. He liked to worship the golden calves. He's famous for putting up big temples in different places where people could come and worship the golden calves. Remember, these are kings of Israel. Well, he was replaced by a guy named Jehoahaz. He didn't last very long. He was replaced by a guy named Jehoash, who lasted 16 years. That's king number 12. And then after that, 13, Jeroboam the second. This guy lasted 41 years. There was a big earthquake during this period of time. This is around 760 BC. But he was followed by a guy named Zechariah, who lasted 6 months, who was killed by a guy named Shula, who lasted 30 days. Now, the guy that followed Shula was a guy named Menahem. Don't you love how these names are all reminiscent of these people in politics today? Menahem, he paid tribute to Assyria. By this time now, the kingdom of Israel, which had been pretty much weakened and was in disarray because of its constant fighting with the kingdom of Judah, was under threat by Assyria. And in order to keep the peace with Assyria, they had to pay lots and lots of silver. And this, of course, was started under Menahem. Menahem's famous for a lot of creepy stuff. Let me see if I can see what he did. Well, there's so many of them. He came right about the same time as the Iron Age started. Anyway, after Menahem came a guy named Pekariah. Yeah, that's about as near as I'm going to get. This guy was king number 17. He only lasted 2 years. And again, he continued committing the sins of his fathers. We all know what that is. He was killed by a guy named Pekah. Pekah, he was king number 18. He lasted 16 years. And of course, he committed the sins of Jeroboam. The last king of Israel before the monarchy was wiped out for good, this is the northern kingdom, remember, was Hosea. He was the last king, 721 BC. Why was he the last king? Because he stopped, well, right before him, I think it was probably Pekahiah that did this. They stopped paying tribute to Assyria, pissed off Syria. Now, I believe Hosea tried to reinstitute the tribute to try to keep Assyria from destroying them. He was going to try to see if they could buy the peace back, but I guess it failed. Well, anyway, that was the end of the royal line. Now, again, we're only talking about the northern kingdom, and we're talking about a bloodline that has nothing to do with Solomon or David, but is attached to other tribes. Now, a lot of times when these guys were killed, these kings were killed, you're going to see that they weren't the only ones that were killed. Everybody in their family, everybody in their bloodline was killed. Guys like Menahem, I'm pretty sure it was him. When he came into power, he didn't just kill the king, killed the queen, killed all the sons, all the cousins, all the whatever. Anybody that had any connection whatsoever was killed. They made sure to wipe out these bloodlines. So, again, these are these sacred so-called bloodlines. They're committing genocide against themselves. They're by routine religiously killing the children, their own children, in sacrifice. These are the bloodlines that we are told are the children of God, the chosen people. Of course, in the Bible, you look at Zechariah and things like that, you'll see that they're chastised. Let me see if I can pull up some Zechariah just for fun. Here we go. Now, here's a direct translation from Hebrew to English, the chapter of Zechariah. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we have read some of this before. Now, the thing is that this is a little more detailed. They say exactly who did what. Let's see. Let's just dive in here and see what we can see, because like I said, a lot of it seems to be redundant. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, add your burnt offerings unto your sacrifices, and eat ye flesh. For I spoke not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices. But this thing I commanded them, saying, Hearken unto my voice, and I will be your God, and ye shall be my people, and walk ye in the way that I command you, that it may be well with you. But they hearkened not, nor inclined their ear, but walked in their own counsels, even in the stubbornness of their evil heart, and went backwards and not forwards, ever since the day of your fathers came forth out of the land of Egypt unto this day. And though I have sent unto you all of my servants and prophets, sending them daily betimes and often, yet they hearkened not unto me, nor inclined their ear, but made their stiff neck, and they did worse than their fathers. And thou shalt speak of these words unto them, but they shall not hearken to thee. Thou shalt also call unto them, but they will not answer thee. Therefore thou shalt say unto them, This is the nation that hath not hearkened to the voice of the Lord their God, nor received correction. Faithfulness is perished, and is cut off from their mouth. Cut off thy hair, cast it away, take up a lamentation on the high hills, for the Lord hath rejected and forsaken the generation of his wrath. For the children of Judah have done that which is evil in my sight, saith the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house whereon my name is called to file it. And they have built the high places, of Topeth, there's that word, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnon, to burn their sons and their daughters in a fire, which I commanded not, neither came it into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be called Topeth, nor the valley of the son of Hinnon, but the valley of slaughter, for they shall bury in Topeth for lack of room, and the carcasses of this people shall be food for the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the earth, and none shall frighten them away. Then I will cause to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth, and the voice of gladness, and the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, for the land shall be desolate. Now that's both kingdoms, both sides, because they both did it. Anyway, I think that the influence of the Canaanites, the influence of the Phoenicians, it's the same thing. If these people are crying anti-Semitism, I think what they're really crying is anti-Phoenician policy. I believe that the sins of Jeroboam, the sins of Solomon, the sins of all of these people who took over afterwards, they all go back to the same places. In Babylon, they worship Baal, Baal-el. In Phoenicia, they also worshipped Baal, but it was Melquart. Melquart is also known as Baal. Melquart is probably Moloch, the same entity they're worshiping in Babylon. So it really doesn't matter. But unlike the Babylonians, we do know that the Phoenicians had their influence almost around the entire southern Mediterranean and some of the north. And we know that the enemies of these people came from the north, the so-called sea people. So if we look at these ancient rivalries and these ancient desires to rebuild these lost kingdoms, which kingdom are we really trying to rebuild here? Because we know one thing, we know that the kingdom of Solomon and the kingdom of David didn't really add up to a whole lot. Because once Solomon died, he wasn't even followed by a son. He was followed by a superintendent. And all of the families, the various tribes that followed as kings of that country were one by one destroyed and their bloodlines erased. Now, one thing else I want to leave with you before we go, and that is the word Shiloh. And of course, Shiloh is mentioned many places, but it's also mentioned in Jeremiah section, passage 12. It says, "For go ye now unto my place which was in Shiloh, where I caused my name to dwell at the first, and to see what I did for it, what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel." What is Shiloh? Shiloh is the place which in what is now the West Bank, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept for 369 years. Isn't that interesting? 369 years it was kept in Samaria. This was the first temple. This was the first temple, not the thing that they built in Jerusalem, but this tent city that lasted 369 years was the real first temple. Now, what happened to the ark? It was taken into battle against the Philistines and lost to the Philistines. But when people talk about the first temple and building the first temple, no, it was in Shiloh. Definitely something you want to look into. Anyway, so what's the lesson of this? Well, we know that the enemy hides behind somebody else. And I think that the enemy that we're really looking for here, the one responsible for eating the babies and the blood sacrifice, is actually someone else hiding again behind somebody else. So are the Pharisees Phoenicians? Are they the children of Jeroboam? We don't know. I think there's plenty of blame to go around, and that's why it's difficult, and that's why it's so important to open up the Getty so that we can expose the truth once and for all without having to go back on history, which we seem to get it wrong all the time. I know I'm guilty of that. Obviously, the Getty is the only thing that's going to really expose the truth. I want to thank you guys again for all your hard work. I know that we're really getting to become quite the thing out there, and it's all because of you guys, and I hope you will continue to do that as much as you can. I should also say, of course, that I do depend on your contributions for a lot of stuff, so if you are able to do that, please use my PayPal, which of course is StephenKelly714@yahoo.com. And you have to say friends or family, otherwise I have to send it back. Beyond that, I just want to remind you also, again, if you haven't got my book, or if you want information on becoming a Jedi, or if you want a healing, please contact me via my main email, which is law17gun@aol.com. And we are growing slightly in the group and Telegram, which of course is Occupy the Getty /Stephen D. Kelly. I appreciate that. And our Twitter presence, my Twitter presence is seemingly growing, and of course that has a lot to do with you guys. So I hope you keep it up, because even if I'm not posting a bunch of stuff, the stuff you post is doing the work. All right, so I really appreciate that. And of course, I want to remind you that, well, I will be back next week, God willing. And I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight. And I hope you'll contact me soon, either in the group or personally. Either way, it's been fun. Okay, with that, I'm going to let you go. And I'm going to remind you one more time that my name is Stephen D. Kelly. This is TruthCat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com. And this is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. All right. Okay. Once again, Good night. God bless. Adios. And goodbye.